Dragon Ball Z is probably the most successful anime ever, and with any entertainment success comes video games. Fighting games mostly in the case of Dragon Ball Z, but with the exception of a butchered NES release, the original and better Dragon Ball series has had few adaptations localized for the States. That's changed within the past 5 years or so, and one of the earliest examples is Dragon Ball Advanced Adventure, surprisingly, for the Game Boy Advance. As a fan of the original Dragon Ball series, this game is pretty exciting. A 2D platforming beat-em-up that takes you throughout the whole Dragon Ball series? That sounds fantastic, only there are a couple snags along the way. And first and foremost is the gameplay. But let me preface any and all criticisms by saying Advanced Adventure is in no way a bad game. Kind of average? Sure, but not terrible. That being said, this game is kind of saved by its license. That's not something I thought I would ever say, but it's true. As I said, Advanced Adventure is a beat 'em up with some platforming elements, a very repetitive one, as most games of the genre are. I think that the video footage is pretty self-explanatory, and really, it encapsulates the whole game. The game is very linear, with a few very obvious optional areas with extra health or collectibles. Nothing really changes in the way of Goku's abilities, except for the initial access to energy blasts and some upgrades to health and power. There are a few enemy archetypes, and they're translated between a couple of different sprites and palette swaps. Most levels are 2D platformers, but one-on-one levels try to break them up quite frequently with a more fighting game approach. With the relatively limited Game Boy Advance controls, this may not mean much, but the fights are actually quite fun, if not just as repetitive as the majority of the game. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, as Advanced Adventure is actually pretty fun in short bursts. Speaking of short, the game is just that. The main story will only take about 2 to 3 hours of your time, but the second quest playthrough as Krillin, one-on-one fights and minigames also become available upon completion. As I've stressed a few times, Dragon Ball Advanced Adventure is not a bad game. The repetition only becomes glaring in long play sessions, and the moment-to-moment action is satisfying. For fans of the original series, or those looking for the roots of the immensely popular Dragon Ball Z, it's a fun adaptation that takes some reasonable creative license with how the events played out in the actual show. Even if the adaptation does leave out the final saga, and somehow presents a very abridged story with a ton of text. Oh, and Dragon Ball is one word. How dare they?